Remember my last Gabe versus Blue Sun video? Well, I'm playing against the same opponent, except that now he switched up to a different glacier deck, HB Engineering the Future. So, I will spend an inordinate amount of time talking about my opening hand again because it basically dictates the early half of my game, which says a lot. Which is a lot. It entirely dictates the first half of my game. Okay, so Sneak Door Beta is always good to see, and once again, I reaffirm the fact that you want to have 3 copies of them in your Gabe deck, even though the other 2 copies will be dead draws, because the consistency of seeing them is really huge. When I get a copy of it in my opening hand, it means that I can really threaten them from turn 2 or turn 3 with a Sneak Door install. Account Siphon can't be overestimated, especially against HB, which probably does not run any tag punishment, and has clickable Bioroids to boot. So definitely a one to see in my deck. 2 Code Gate Breakers, not the most ideal thing. They are redundant, more or less. They serve different purposes, I know. Passport is for breaking centrals for cheap. Cerberus is for challenging remotes. But I'm not too happy about seeing 2 of them. Then there's Parasite. Parasite is actually good in the HB matchup, as opposed to the Blue Sun matchup. It's not that good because HB eyes tend to be high strength, but at least I can destroy their high cost eyes. So the first thing I do, obviously, is run HQ. I get slapped by a Toll Booth. Nothing I can do about that. So I gain credits for the rest of the turns. Then I access his R&D the next turn, seeing nothing, and I draw into another program, a Breach. So I install Parasite on the Toll Booth. So now I need to destroy the Toll Booth because I could use Emergency Shutdown, but he will eventually grow pretty rich, and yeah, that's paying the 3 credit tax every time I want to run through HQ is not a desirable notion. Now he has a Naked Adonis out, but it's protected by what seems to be an Ash. I could challenge it, but I'm pretty broke, so I decide to Sneak Door instead. Hopefully I can find a couple of agendas in there. I don't, and I do not run on my last click. Better safe than sorry. Instead, I draw into a Compromised Employee. Now, Compromised Employee is pretty good against HB. It's not so good because they probably don't run too many ice. Instead, they just run big ice, so they won't be raising that many. But it's nice to see early anyways. So I do see the EG2 that I access from his hand, and I realize that it's going to land me in a huge dilemma either way. If I let him fire the trace, I'm going to finish with a tag and a brain damage. And I do not want to take brain damage at this point because all my cards in my hand are important. So my only option was to break the trace and let the Trash 1 program subroutine fire off. This meant that I would lose my Sneak Door, but I would still get the HQ access from Sneak Dooring before I got the Sneak Door trashed. So yeah, that was a little unfortunate because I was running on so few credits, I couldn't actually afford to break the trace tree from the EG2, let alone a boosted trace. So yes, he fortifies his Adonis, and I think that's where you see my rather big mistake. I should have trashed the Adonis while I still could. Now it's untrashable, he's going to get very rich. So he has 2 big eyes on the board right now, but I'm going to counter that swiftly with a Passport into Account Siphon. That's where Parasite comes in so useful. Parasite allows me to lower the strength of the Toll Booth so that Passport can actually break it for pretty cheap. I only had to pay 4 credits to get through the Toll Booth server. So yes, Toll Booth does give you a false sense of security. It's not all that strong. I still have 2 tags left over, and I draw into my second copy of Compromised Employee, so I know that I do not want to go tag me. I clear the tags after scoring the priority requisition. And here I make a comment in the chat box. If this kills me, I'll be sad, because he might be running Punitive Counter-Strike. By clearing the tags, I'm lowering my credit pool. If that causes me to lose the game due to Punitive Counter-Strike, I'll be really very sad. But that wasn't the case. So the game goes on. I have 3 points in my bank. That's a good start. So I install the Compromised Employee, run R&D. Hopefully he resists the ice so I'll get more money, but he doesn't. 2 Compromised Employees out is pretty strong at this stage of the game. I attempt to run his Adonis server, and hopefully he'll feed me money. Does he? No, he doesn't. That's unfortunate. So the only thing I can do right now is to trash his Ash. Once again, you see how many successful runs I'm making. Really wish I had Desperado. That is such an important card for my deck. Alright, In the meantime, he biotics out an accelerated beta test, and oh man, huge mistake. Definitely should be trashing those Jacksons. So yeah, I'm making big mistakes left, right, center. You have to trash Jacksons against HB because they almost certainly run accelerated beta tests. You do not want them to get free beta tests off. So I immediately sacked his Jacksons. Thankfully, damage was very limited because all he res was a Caduceus. I thought the second card was a Jackson. Turns out it's another Eve. It's just an Eve campaign. But now he's pretty poor because he just used Biotic Labor. So I'm actually able to trash his Adonis, which is pretty important. No free credits for him. And now I need to find some credits myself. Unfortunately, I haven't been drawing into the bank jobs that should be in my deck. They are in my deck, 2 copies of them. Just can't find them. Alright, so yes, in the meantime, I can't really do much at this point. But I do find my 3rd copy of Compromised Employee, and wow, he found another copy of Jackson Howard. So, yeah. And there's nothing much I can do. Looking at my hand, I've been drawing a couple of cards and clicking for credits, but there's really nothing much in the way of solutions. I don't really need to install the Cerberus. I don't really need to install the Breach. Data Sucker's nice, but he has already iced out all his servers at this point. He clears virus counters once again. Very interesting. He chooses to leave the toll booth on the board instead of replacing it with another piece of ice. So every 4 turns, he is forced to purge virus counters, which is actually a huge tempo hit. I can't agree with that strategy, especially if you're planning to do it for the long term. He is much better off finding another piece of ice to guard HQ. But I don't know. I don't see his hand, so I don't really know. Now, seeing that I have 3 compromised employees, I can actually run through Caduceus and yeah, spend lots of credits to, freely break through the Caduceus without worrying about Trace, because I have 3 compromised Trace credits. Then he reses the Eli, which I click through. Since I'm already halfway through the server, I might as well go all the way through. And I gain 2 credits for him resing the Eli. Now he attempts to score a 3-pointer. Can I contest it? Let's find out. The very least I'm going to do is to run, because that allows me to gain 3 credits. Unfortunately, that cost me 2 clicks because it's a Victor 2, and I do not wish to take brain damage at this point. I suppose I could have let the Trace fire because I was going to check out anyway. Yes, that's a huge mistake. I should have let the Trace fire. Why? Because I have 3 compromised employee credits. If he wants me to beat the Trace, he has to pump it up ridiculously. So this is a huge mistake on my part. I wasn't thinking clearly. Of course, I should have let him fire the Trace and then let the end run do the work, because I was going to check out anyway. The inner ice could have been an Ichi that ruined my day. Turns out it's just a data pike. He rested it with the priority requisition that he just scored. And I realized another huge mistake. His toll booth had 4 parasite counters on it, and my data sucker had 1 counter. I could have destroyed his toll booth. That would have made my game 10 times easier. It will allow me to emergency shut down his Ichi. And yeah, huge mistakes that basically turned the game in his favor. Can I recover from it? Probably. I'm 2 agendas away. It's still pretty far, but R&D is getting thicker, and at this point I realized that the moment he draws agenda, he's either going to biotic label them out or score them through his remote. I attempt to run his R&D and force him to rest ice for money. I do get money, but I lose all my clicks to Heimdall 2. Heimdall 2 is especially painful because Breach cannot break it easily. It costs 6 credits to break it with Breach because it's strength 7, just 1 strength away from strength 6. If it was strength 6, it would cost 4 credits to break, just like Heimdall 1. So that's not the case. I'll need to find another way in, and that's none other than HQ. I break through his HQ for 4 credits with my passport, and 1 credit plus 3, and I find an accelerated beta test. That was more for the emergency shutdown I would use on his Heimdall 2. That was my plan. The random access into an agenda was just icing on the cake. Lucky for me. So I find the accelerator beta test tying up the score at 5-5. 1 more agenda for each closes the game. So that looks like an agenda to me. I'm going to inside job it with my Cerberus. It's just an Eve campaign. That's unfortunate. well, I am able to destroy his toll booth at the very least. Too bad there's no account siphon. I would have really appreciated one at this point. And yeah, at this point I'm just going to raid his HQ until I find an agenda. I don't see it, but I do see the biotic label, which means that the moment he draws a 3-2, he's going to win the game. And he wins the game. he top decked the beta test. Well, nothing much I can do about that. I wouldn't say so much that he's lucky, it's more of my misplays. As I mentioned, there were so many things that went wrong with my game. I didn't do a very good job of keeping him poor. I mean, against Glacier, especially HB, it's very hard to keep them poor because this deck doesn't make quite enough money to challenge the Ash Tracers, the Adonises, and the Eves. Certainly not the Eves. And the only real way of keeping them poor is to Parasite and emergency shut down all their big eyes, which in this case I actually did a decent job of. Once again, you see the weakness of him not protecting HQ adequately. A single toll booth isn't going to cut it. You always want at least two layers of ice. If he had put a second layer of ice on HQ, my game would have been so much harder. I wouldn't have been able to steal the accelerated beta test, neither would I have been able to break his toll booth or emergency shut down his Heimdall. There are lots of things that Gabe can do once he's through your HQ. You do not want that to happen. If he basically, at the end of the game, he had 3 pieces of ice on R&D and 1 on HQ. If it had been a 2-2 spread, 2 ice on R&D and 2 on HQ, my game would have been almost impossible to win because HQ is almost unviable and R&D is tedious to break, and all I get from accessing R&D is 1 card and 1 credit. It's not a worthy trade for me. So yeah, Gabe used to be stronger when I could actually afford influence for high impact R&D digging events like indexing and Maker's Eye. Now that I need so much influence for Parasite, Data Sucker, and all the important cards, there just isn't enough space or influence rather to make R&D runs viable, and that has significantly weakened Gabe in my opinion. Still, it's good to play this game to know one of my weak matchups. HB Engineering the Future is definitely not a good matchup for me, and this game is evidence of that. Thanks for watching. Happy net running. Goodbye.